My neighbor truly believed she could simply erase my 150-year-old heritage tree because it blocked the view from her backyard. What she didn't realize was that in this state, cutting down a protected oak isn't just illegal, it's a financial execution order. While she stood there admiring my suddenly empty yard, I was already on the phone with a forensic arborist, preparing to hand her a $300,000 invoice. Stay with me for the exact second the police cruiser rolled in, and the moment her smug grin collapsed into a $300,000 disaster. In the peaceful, upscale neighborhood of Abbeville, Alex's property was known for its historic charm. Towering over his backyard stood a magnificent white oak, 150 years old, planted by his great-grandfather. It wasn't just a tree, it was a living monument. Its roots stretched as deeply into family history as they did into the soil. But to his neighbor, Linda, the self-declared queen of the HOA, that towering symbol of legacy was nothing more than an inconvenience in her perfectly curated world. Linda complained that the oak obstructed the view from her brand-new infinity pool. She insisted the falling leaves were attacking her costly filtration system. Over and over, she demanded that Alex remove it, and every single time, Alex calmly refused. He understood the law. The oak was classified as a protected heritage tree, and removing it carried severe legal consequences. But Linda wasn't accustomed to being told no. Soon, she began weaponizing her position, issuing fraudulent HOA fines in an attempt to pressure him. Alex didn't budge. Then came the week he had to leave town for a business trip. For Linda, it was the opening she'd been waiting for. She hired a shady, under-the-table tree removal crew, the kind that worked cheaply and never asked questions. She falsely claimed the land belonged to her, and that the oak posed a safety threat. Within hours, the mighty tree that had survived a century and a half of storms, droughts, and time itself was reduced to nothing, all to satisfy one woman's ego. When Alex returned home, he barely recognized his own backyard. The rich green canopy that once shaded his property was gone. In its place stood an exposed sky and a massive, raw, stump-bleeding sap. From her balcony, Linda watched with a satisfied smile, a glass of juice in hand. "Doesn't it look so much better now?" she taunted. Alex didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply took out his phone and called a forensic arborist. He understood something Linda didn't. She hadn't just cut down a tree. She had signed her own financial death warrant. Her smug victory lasted precisely 48 hours. That weekend, Linda hosted a celebratory garden party. She boasted to fellow HOA members about how she had improved the neighborhood's appearance. She assumed Alex's silence meant defeat. What she failed to understand was that his silence was a quiet assembly of a professional trap. Monday morning arrived. As Linda sipped her coffee, 3 men wearing high-visibility vests pulled up outside Alex's property. They weren't construction workers. They were forensic arborists, the crime scene investigators of the plant world. Alex had researched thoroughly. In their state, tree law was notoriously unforgiving, especially when it involved protected heritage oaks. You don't simply compensate for lumber. You pay the replacement value of a tree of equivalent size, age, and maturity. And since no nursery sells 150-year-old oaks, the replacement cost includes cranes, specialized transport, expert planting, and multi-year survival guarantees. For hours, the arborist measured the stump, counted growth rings, and analyzed its health using photographs Alex had taken before leaving town. Linda stormed over to the fence, shouting that Alex was trespassing on his own property and claiming the stump now belonged to the HOA. For the first time, Alex met her glare and calmly said, "Linda, I hope you kept the receipts for that pool, because you're going to need every dollar." The lead arborist handed Alex a preliminary assessment. Because the tree was a protected white oak and had been intentionally removed from someone else's property, the state's triple damages statute applied. The tree's estimated value was $100,000. With mandatory triple damages, Linda wasn't facing $100,000. She was facing $300,000. But that was only the beginning of her unraveling. Alex didn't stop at filing a civil lawsuit. He contacted local law enforcement and reported grand larceny and timber theft. By Tuesday afternoon, a patrol car pulled into Linda's driveway. The HOA queen was about to discover that her title carried no weight with the sheriff's department. As the handcuffs snapped shut behind her wrists, her outraged cries of, "Do you know who I am?" echoed to the same neighborhood she once ruled. The case quickly became statewide news. At the hearing, Linda appeared in her most expensive designer suit, still convinced her HOA presidency would insulate her from consequences. She sat at the defense table wearing a faint smirk, whispering to her costly attorney that this was merely a misunderstanding over some wood. Then Alex's legal team began presenting evidence, and the courtroom fell silent. First, security footage played across the screen. It showed Linda clearly instructing the tree crew, pointing at the 150-year-old oak while laughing. Then the forensic arborist took the stand. He testified that the state's triple damages statute wasn't optional. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a mandatory penalty for the deliberate destruction of a protected heritage tree. He broke down the oak's biological worth, its deep historical roots, and the staggering expense required to transport and replant a mature replacement of similar size. When the final figure flashed across the courtroom screen, an audible gasp rippled through the gallery. $342,000. Linda's attorney attempted to frame it as a misunderstanding, a simple error blown out of proportion. But that was when Alex delivered the final blow. He calmly presented a certified letter he had sent to the HOA 6 months earlier. He hadn't overreacted back then. He hadn't threatened anyone publicly. The letter clearly outlined the tree's protected legal status and explicitly warned that any interference or damage would result in legal action. It eliminated any argument or confusion. It proved intent. It proved premeditated malice. The judge, visibly unimpressed with Linda's arrogance and sense of entitlement, didn't hesitate. He didn't merely order her to pay the $342,000 valuation. He added Alex's full legal fees to the judgment. Then he imposed an additional $50,000 punitive fine for her abuse of HOA authority. The color drained from Linda's face, fading from pale to ghostly white as reality struck. Her homeowner's insurance policy did not cover intentional criminal acts. There would be no safety net. She was personally responsible for nearly $450,000. Within 3 months, the once self-crowned queen of the HOA was forced to list her beloved mansion for sale to avoid complete financial ruin. The very board members she had once intimidated and manipulated voted unanimously to remove her from her position. Some of them even filed separate civil claims against her for mismanaging community funds during her presidency. On the day Linda finally moved out, Alex stood quietly in his backyard beside the massive oak stump. He watched as moving trucks hauled away the last pieces of her designer furniture. When Linda walked toward her car, her eyes swollen and red from days of crying, she paused and glanced at Alex one final time. She had lost her home. She had lost her reputation. She had lost her fortune. All because she couldn't tolerate a few falling leaves. With the settlement funds, Alex did more than simply replace what had been destroyed. He invested part of the money into creating a community garden, transforming shared space into something meaningful. The remainder he donated to a forest preservation foundation in his great-grandfather's name. In the exact spot where the original oak once stood, he planted a new white oak sapling. It would take a century to reach the height and grandeur of its predecessor. But Alex was certain of one thing. No one would ever dare lay a hand on it again. Justice had been delivered, and for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt still. After the gavel fell and Linda's carefully constructed world collapsed, Abbottville began to change in ways no one anticipated. For weeks, the empty space where the grand oak once towered served as a solemn reminder of greed and consequence. Yet Alex refused to live in resentment. With the $450,000 secured through the court's final ruling, he realized a victory represented more than compensation. It was an opportunity. The first step he took was hiring a specialized landscaping firm to redesign his entire backyard into a heritage memorial garden. He didn't stop at planting a single tree. He created a grove of rare, legally protected species, trees that future HOA boards would never have the authority to tamper with. He also installed a cutting-edge 4K security system with continuous cloud monitoring, ensuring every boundary of his property remained under watch. It was a direct lesson learned from Linda's calculated destruction. Linda's exit, meanwhile, was anything but graceful. Because the court found her guilty of grand larceny and timber theft, Her career as a real estate consultant collapsed. No reputable firm wanted to associate with a woman who had become the widely recognized face of entitled HOA abuse. Contracts vanished. Clients disappeared. She was eventually forced to relocate to a small, cramped apartment across the city, far from infinity pools, manicured lawns, and curated gardens. The irony was impossible to ignore. The woman who once declared war over falling leaves now lived surrounded by concrete, with no trees in sight. The HOA itself underwent its own reckoning. In the wake of the scandal, board members voted to completely rewrite their bylaws. A historic preservation committee was formed, and Alex was invited to serve as its honorary chair. The new regulations made one thing unmistakably clear. Natural beauty belonged to the homeowners, not to the ego of those in power. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the oak's destruction, Alex hosted a quiet gathering in his backyard. He stood beside the young white oak sapling, now thriving in the enriched soil. Nearby rested the massive, polished stump of the original tree, which he had preserved and transformed into a handcrafted outdoor table, a permanent tribute to his family's legacy. Looking at it, he understood something profound. You can cut down a tree, but you cannot erase the truth, and you certainly cannot outrun the law. As the sun dipped below the horizon and cast golden light across the new garden, Abbottville felt different, calmer, more respectful, more secure. Alex had lost a piece of his childhood, but he had gained something greater: justice for his family, protection for history, and the certainty that some roots, once planted, can never truly be destroyed. Linda was gone. The crown had fallen. And the 150-year story of the white oak was ready to begin again. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, DH Story, for more powerful stories like this. Thank you for watching.